All right, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining today in the Consciousness Transformed. And this is exactly the happening that's taking place in us, in our consciousness. And so I'm really happy that you join today in this one purpose to recognize the truth of who we are and celebrate that together. And so we do this today with a meditation, and this meditation is an I am meditation. So that's always kind of totally making sense. It's totally making sense. So I love that. We did this say Gospel of John, and there were only I am expressions, and that's so beautiful. So today there's an I am meditation. See, this is our center, this is our recognition, but only when it's in your experience. So that's the thing that tells you, no, there is no world. That is that experience that shows you there's no world. There's nobody out there. So in other words, here's where the joining with your brother takes place. Here's where you recognize your oneness. And that is the beauty of the I am meditation. Recognition of oneness. Yes, here's an opportunity to have an incredible experience of union, of communion with God, and at the same time recognizing your oneness with your brother. If that isn't holiness, then what is? So I'm really happy that you joined today in the Consciousness Transformed, and that we give ourselves another possibility to let ourselves be lifted in consciousness to the place where that is natural. In fact, in the experience of yourself, it might feel like you're going down more than anything else. You're sinking deeper into yourself, into your withinness. And you sink so deep that literally you're being lifted up in your consciousness. And sinking down, it can really be the feeling, that's one thing. But it's like the more you let go of any concern, the deeper you sink into your withinness, the higher your experience will be of the elevation that takes place when your consciousness is open. Like that's a natural occurrence. Your consciousness opens. Here's the light. Whoa, that's given to us. That's given to you. So that's worth a serious attempt. That's our practice, really. So the calming down, the relaxation, but at the same time, like the unification of purpose is what takes place within you. Now, here Joel says it too, but it's like that's so good to emphasize. It's not about the words, it's not about knowing the phrases, it's not about reading the right books, it's not even knowing all the infinite way principles. It has nothing to do with it. It's like all these things that we think are so important for our experience is not the experience itself. So here we practice what goes beyond the form, beyond our techniques, beyond our ways of doing this. And that is so great. So you can say, like, even when we play some music, this is also important to recognize. Like, even if we play some music, the music is not going to elevate you. Like, it can be inspiring, it can be really beautiful, you can feel like comforted by it. But the real experience that is taking place within you is your consciousness opening up for communication. The communication is already there. Now it's just up to you to open your consciousness. And this needs constant remembrance, remembering. And that's why we're here. That's why we practice. Like, you forget this all the time. And that's why it's good to remember it. beyond the metaphysics I am. Do you see why, when you reach the mystical, there's no truth to depend on? There's no such thing as a word or a passage or a message that you can rely on. You cannot even rely on infinite way passages. They were not meant to be relied on. They were meant to reveal the truth. Relying on a passage is only for the very beginner. Not to rely on, but to learn from. Anyone who depends on a passage is depending on a straw. I am the truth to depend on. The fact that I am the truth. I and my Father are one. Therefore, there is no need for a dependence. Why? Is there something you need or would like or wish to attain? Not if you understand that I is God. The only truth there is I am. I am truth. I am the way. I am life eternal. When I am in communion, there is a movement from the I that I am that flows through me as action, as being. So we could say with Paul, Christ liveth my life, or He performeth the thing that is appointed for me, because it is I performing it as me. All right, thank you so much for joining in the meditation. That's really lovely. So you see, it's like beyond the metaphysical. So it's like referring to the mystical experience, and Joel's words refer to that in general. It is not always recognized for sure, because it looks like, oh yeah, okay, so now my consciousness needs to be open, and then I have an experience of God, and then in fact everything falls into place. I got a healthy body, my finances are okay, the government might change his mind, and this and this and this, like everything is taken care of. This is the easiest way to express this, of course, but it's like there's some truth in there, because it's like the mystical experience is where this is all about. Now, we all love to have a mystical experience. I have no doubt about that. I have no doubt that we would love to experience direct communication with God, perfect communication, perfect like harmony, perfect healthy body, healthy finances, healthy everything. We all love that. We all love that, no doubt. And you say like, yes, I want peace, yeah, for everyone, absolutely. And all this. So that's, you can easily say yes to that. But then it doesn't happen yet when you just say yes to it. And this is the part where the work comes in. And that work, to get to that experience, might not be that popular, because in fact it is not really confirming you. It is not really acknowledging you in your ways. And you love that. You love to be acknowledged in your ways. You love to say, you love to hear that people say like, well, you're doing it so well, you're so fantastic, you're really wonderful, you're such a beautiful person, and all this, like everything you do is so great. And we love to be credited for what we think we are, for what we think we do, for the successes that we have. And of course now it has already been changed within you, You might have already changed your mind completely about that. And that's a necessary step. Like consciousness transformed is not waiting for acknowledgement, outside acknowledgement. No, this is a very quiet and still activity that we're performing, which is connecting with your withinness. So the only acknowledgement that you now receive that makes any sense to you is in fact the acknowledgement of God, like complete God dependency. Not dependency on words, not dependency on passages, whether they are from the infinite way or wherever they come from. Like, you're not relying on those. No, they teach you, they point in the direction, but you want the full-blown experience of the direct communication, the acknowledgement from within. This is how you could say it is. And this is something that is out of your control. It is out of your, it has nothing to do with your doings. It has nothing to do with your doings or with your ideas about yourself, or whether you do it good or bad, or whether you're sinful or not, or whether you're guilty or not, or whether your past was awful, or whether you have a dreadful future coming up. Like, all these ideas that you hold about it have nothing to do with it. And this is the part that takes a moment to accept. Simple as that. It takes a moment to accept it, that tells you nothing about your God communication. That is not going to be acknowledged. No, it's not even there. But this is exactly the part, and this is where we come to our topic, you could say. This is exactly the part where the world comes in, because you, so-called dealing with the world, is what binds you. You valuing the world is what binds you to it. You, say, perceiving conflict, you perceiving something that is not right, put you right in the middle of the world, put you right into the place of conflict, into the battlefield, you could say, like immediately, because your mind starts to engage in looking for solutions, or whatever the occurrence is. But at least you have, if you see injustice here, which is impossible not to see, you're bound here, you're connected, you're literally caught in the trap of world belief. And so this takes tremendous training, this takes tremendous vigilance to not do that, to release those ideas, to let that exactly go, to leave that behind. And then in fact nothing yet, but at least you released all this stuff in your mind so that your consciousness can be open to receive something else. Now, this receiving something else can take place exactly when you release the stuff that you occupy your mind with. But there's no overlap. Like, this is the confusing part about the titles of the tapes that we're going to take a listen to in the next couple of weeks. They're all titled Between Two Worlds. Now, that acknowledges both worlds, and only one is real. So you can confirm the world that you think you live in as much as you want, but by doing so, the other world disappears. Literally, like heaven on earth cannot coexist in that sense in your consciousness. You're either in an experience of heaven or you're in a worldly experience. And to keep it really systematic and clear till this point, this is exactly what's occurring. So it is difficult to listen to a title like Between Two Worlds. That's why I've hesitated to ever use them, because it's like the titles are so confusing. Because now you seem to be justified to live in two worlds, while that is totally impossible. You don't live in two worlds. So of course you can shift between them in a certain sense, but then there's no overlap. In fact, there's not even a recognition of a worldly belief in your heaven experience, and vice versa either. When you experience this world, there's no heaven, there's no God. And Joel emphasizes this all the time. In fact, in every talk, like, you acknowledge something here and you ask for things that you need, because if you have a worldly experience, you sure as hell, literally, you sure as hell need stuff. You need this, you need that, you need water, you need electricity, you need a car, you need who knows what, a house, you need this, and on and on and on. So it's like you literally entered into a place of limitation. And so this is good to have this overview for a moment, because then we know what we're dealing with and what this spiritual path is. The spiritual path only starts when you release your ideas about this world. Otherwise, there's just this world. There's nothing else. You can pray, you can meditate, you can do whatever you like, but it's not going to be your full-blown God experience if you don't release any of your ideas of where you think you are, or who you think you are, or when you think you are. And this is crucial. It's absolutely crucial. Otherwise, nothing happens. Now, Joel has some expressions, and of course I'm going to share them with you. It's like Joel has some expressions that we really have to take a look at, because let's make sure that we hear it well. No material world. Now, all of human experience has its foundation in material sense. A material sense of a spiritual universe. A material sense of spiritual creation. A material sense of spiritual supply. But all humans' experience has its foundation in material sense. Yeah? So this is a bit confusing if Joel brings in the spiritual universe, but he does that for a specific reason. So, and he continues, therefore all the prayers that are uttered to God for food, for clothing, for housing, for supply, all the nonsense that goes up to God in prayer, when it is so simple to look out of any window anywhere on the face of the earth and see that there is no lack. See, now, here's exactly the conflict, the dilemma, you could say. Joel literally expresses a dilemma here. Because we're talking consciousness, and we're talking about consciousness transformed. Now, all human experience has its foundation in material sense, right? You believe that this world, that you drop, when you drop a stone and your toe is under it, that your toe will hurt. That's what you believe. You believe in a Newtonian world where cause and effect really are there. You drop a stone, it hurts your toe. So here is suddenly he opens up, but then actually he starts speaking from consciousness transformed. A material sense of a spiritual universe, a material sense of spiritual creation, a material sense of spiritual supply. Well, that is not what the human experience is. Simply isn't. Human beings don't experience it as a spiritual universe. No, they have to work, they have to survive, they have to make it all continue, like they're up for survival. So that's a bit of the confusing from this sentence. And therefore, all the prayers that are uttered to God for food by humans, thinking that the world is real, just to add some words to this, like the prayers that are uttered for clothing, housing, supply, and all that nonsense that goes up to the God in prayer, is useless. It's like simply that, it's useless. It's nonsense, is what Joel says. But then it's good to read it well. So the prayers that you pray as a human being, believing that this world is real, is nonsense, because it will not reach God. Now, here's consciousness transformed speaking after this. When it is so simple to look out of any window anywhere on the face of the earth and see that there is no lack. Now, Joel speaks from consciousness transformed. A human being doesn't see that. He doesn't see that there is no lack. Now, a human being will look outside his window and thinks, for instance, my neighbor's garden is bigger than mine. He has a new lawnmower. I need that thing too. He's comparing himself. He's doing all kinds. He's in competition with himself, of course, but also with everything. So in that sense, what Joel shares here is a bit confusing. And that's why I wanted to put a light on it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Because there is no such thing that a human being experiences a spiritual universe, or that he can see that there's no lack in this world. If that would be the case, imagine that day. I cannot wait for the day that occurs. Like I can't wait for the day that occurs, that we see no lack. Now look around, turn on your news, look around. There never has been so much greed and so much comparison and so much this and that. If I believe my human eyes in what I see total lack, total hate, total greed, total comparison, competition. If I trust my eyes as a human being, this is what I see. If I turn on the news and my consciousness is placed on a planet called Earth, where you have to survive and you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, in a real terrible, frightening idea that everything is shifting and changing so quickly that you don't know what to do with yourself, that you don't even know where you can count on anymore, in which country you're going to live, or if you have to move, if suddenly your visa is gone, or who knows what is happening. This is the world the human being perceives. He doesn't live in a spiritual universe. Now here's consciousness transformed. That tells us, like literally, whatever you see with your eyes is mesmerism. It's just a temporary reflection of what you are thinking. It has nothing to do with reality. So it in that sense, it does not exist. There's no such thing as this world. And talking transformed consciousness, Jesus Christ, I'm not of this world. I and my Father are one. I'm not of this world. My kingdom is not of this world. So this is the occurrence. Now, if I'm motivated to see like, okay, the world I see now with a lack of limitation doesn't make any sense to me. There must be something else. Then suddenly my invitation to God comes in. I'm willing to consider an alternative to the place where I find myself. That is the first opening to come to an experience, a mystical experience of I am. But that doesn't mean that it will immediately happen. Now maybe it does, who knows? But it's like this needs repeating, this needs some training, this needs some real consideration, it needs practice, it needs vigilance. And not to make that heavy, or sounding heavy, but it's just simply the way that the human mind is made up is literally, it wants to find an easy way to do things. It wants to be pragmatic. It wants to have both worlds for the security. It wants both worlds. It doesn't want one world. It wants both worlds. It doesn't want just a God. No, it wants also a good human life. It wants a good human life with success that is given by God, and with all the luxury that it needs for safety and comfort. That's what a human being wants. And that's what many of us want, in the sense of even when you are, say, introduced into a spiritual path, that still might be the case. You don't even recognize it, that you're doing it. And then, instead of looking at other fellows' possessions, like his beautiful lawnmower or his bigger garden, and desiring them, living in the consciousness that through my consciousness I have access to infinity. Well, here's consciousness transformed speaking. Here's your Christ mind speaking to you. Instead of looking at the other guy's possessions and desiring them, living in the consciousness that through my consciousness I have access to infinity, and this will pour into my consciousness spiritually, take form in my mind mentally, and then appear externally in what we call material form. Not necessarily. It can be like that, but not necessarily. So it is then that the human being is living in a purely material sense of the world. See, this is also a bit confusing. That's why I'm bringing it up, because you want to have this very clear. Here's the same confusion coming up again. And then instead of looking at the other guy's possessions and desiring them, you let it go, living in the consciousness that through my consciousness I have access to infinity. And this my consciousness is in fact a consciousness freed from the whole idea of an I that I call myself, or that I define as myself. I have my individual experience of I am, but it has no longer to do with my ideas about myself. Now I have access to infinity. And that is going to be given to me. I cannot do that. It's coming to me, like literally God is coming to me. I cannot establish that contact. God takes that step to me. If my consciousness is open, it can come to me. But that's the direction. And this will pour into my consciousness spiritually, exactly. It pours into my consciousness spiritually if I let go of every thought I hold about myself and about others, and if I let go of the tendency to establish myself or look for confirmation or be concerned about the future. Take form in my mind mentally. It takes form in my mind mentally. Yeah, that could be the case, but it doesn't have to, of course. And then appear externally in what we call material form. That's also not necessary. It's like if I am in an experience, so that's why I'm like bringing this up. I need to clarify this for myself. Like I want this to be so clear. Like if I'm having, my consciousness is open. I finally got over the fact that my neighbor has a bigger lawnmower than I have, or a bigger garden, or a prettier wife, or who knows what. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the comparison is. When my mind stops comparing, when my mind stops trying to solve my own problem, when I release literally all ideas that I can possibly hold about myself for just a moment, something can occur. Gods can come into my vacant mind, like the mind is empty for a moment. Now my consciousness is empty. Now the light can come in. Now what does this do with me? Why does this need to be translated into form? That's not necessary. I experienced this. I experienced the love of God within me. What does that do with me? It literally confirms to me that there is no such thing as this place. And it takes away all the concern I can possibly have about this place. Does that mean that I don't need stuff, that I suddenly don't need a house to live in, or blah, blah, blah? No, of course not. And is that going to be taken care of? Sure. Is it where that is about? No, not at all. Because that is only a temporary moment of seeing that there literally is no lack. Like, that is an experience in itself that might not happen right away. That can take a moment before it actually enters into your consciousness, that you see, oh my God, there is no such thing as lack. Look around, everything is given me. Is this world then suddenly different in form? No, not at all. It didn't matter. Like nothing. Everything is exactly in the same spot. I didn't get anything extra. But I see there's no lack. That's exactly what's occurring when you come into the experience of this. When my mind is literally in connection with the eternal. This whole place literally disappears in that. It doesn't matter any longer. If it mattered, I was caught in it. No, it doesn't matter. Now everything is still there, and I could care less how it looks. It doesn't need to be this or that. It doesn't need to have a certain form. It doesn't need to be confirmed that I'm doing the right thing or anything. No, of course not. I don't value it any longer. It is not determining who I am. So this is so essential, and that's why I wanted to take a really good look at the expressions that Joel is giving, because I don't know how this got about, maybe by the editor who did this, I don't know. But like there's so much, in fact, so much confusion in these expressions that I share, that I thought I need to dissect them and take them apart, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And you start to accept what it shares and think that that is it. And that's the trouble with if it isn't clearly put into words. Now that's so lucky for us, really, that is given. And I'm really true about that. It's like that's really given. To receive it like this. And yeah, so there's more expressions. Oh my God. Please understand. Now here's a word of Joel. Please understand that a human is not living in a material world because there isn't any. Yeah, but sure. God is spirit, and God made all that is made, and anything that God did not make was not made. Therefore, all that exists is spirit and spirit's creation, about which the human race entertains a materialistic concept. Well, see, here's the thing then. Like, now it seems, and this is another one, like now it seems that there are people out there living in a material world. You can easily make that true for yourself. If there is anyone living outside of you in a world where you are no longer interested in, if you think there's somebody else out there, then you're still bound by it. Do you understand? It's like you're still bound by it by believing that there's someone else in that world that still lives on and lives on and lives on. And to a certain extent that is of course true. But in our acceptance of this message, it is like God is spirit. God made all that is made. So in fact, nobody is living in that world. So is anyone there? No, there is not anyone there. There is nobody out there in the world that doesn't exist. Yeah? This is really something else to come to your understanding. So please understand that he is not living in a material world. And please understand that if you see someone living in that material world, it doesn't mean that you see him, because there is no such thing as a material world. Now this is a step up, isn't it? It's like, okay, you can admit, yeah, there's no material world, but now you see a guy in a material world. Is this guy real in this material world? No. No, there's nobody there, because this place does not exist. Is in fact what Joel shares with you, right? If you listen to this sentence, it's literally what he says. Now, why is that so important? Otherwise, you cannot get out of this construct. You cannot get out of this world if you still think that there are people around, running around in it, in this material world that you still see. Then you are bound in it, nobody else. So this is crucial. So we can easily admit, that there's no material universe. We can easily admit God is spirit, and spirit is the only thing there is. There's nothing else. We can easily admit that. So now the consequences of that acceptance of that idea is then, the consequences lie in the fact that there literally is nothing outside of you, that none of this is real, that this is only a temporary reflection of what you are thinking, and it has no reality. And if you let go of these ideas that you hold about yourself and about everything in this dream, you spring into heaven. Literally, like you are waking up out of it right there. This is the step to take. This is how consciousness transforms. If consciousness, it can be very wrong consciousness. If your consciousness, say, still considering and cherishing ideas about a world out there, about somebody else out there, about somebody who needs your help, or somebody who does this or who does that, if you still think that that is what is going on, you are finding yourself in a worldly experience of yourself as a human being. It has nothing to do with the spiritual path. So that's why this is so total. Like, it's either you're in a full experience of your humanness or you're out of it. There's no in between. So I think I made that clear with these expressions. So that's why we needed to slow down with these, and that's why I took them out. So we're going to listen to Joel really quick now, because otherwise we hardly have any time. So I'm starting the tape right at the beginning, and let's see how far we get with that. Thank you so much.
Good morning, and let us see if we can make this a happy Easter by gaining a higher concept of birth and death. We cannot understand birth or death or resurrection unless we go back to understand our false concept of birth. Without understanding that, we cannot gain a correct concept of death and resurrection, because death and resurrection are both founded on our ignorance of birth. Many have been taught that we were created in sin and brought forth in iniquity. Many have been led to believe that there is something not quite spiritual or not quite right in one sense or another about the whole idea of creation and birth. And the reason is this, that we have approached that subject from a purely materialistic standpoint. We have thought of creation as an act of man and woman. And there always lurks some feeling of wrongness about it. And in that sense there is, because it means that we are accepting man as a creator. And it's an impossibility to think along that line without something feeling wrong about it. Because it is all wrong. Man is not a creator. And that is what the wrong feeling comes from, and that is why it has been called sin and iniquity. Materialistically, we are taught that man starts from a seed. And of course, now you must be able to understand that that could never have been true. That there must have been a time before the seed. And this is when man had his beginning, not with the seed. The seed was already created. Therefore, man must have begun before the creation. And so, if you understand, or if you have even glimpsed the major principle of the infinite way, the major revelation, and that is that that which we call God is actually consciousness. Consciousness is God. True, it is the infinite, the divine consciousness which is God, but this is the miracle of the infinite way. That infinite divine consciousness is also individual consciousness. The consciousness of you and of me, and not a bit of it, all of it. All of it. All of the infinite divine consciousness is my individual consciousness and yours, because while materialistically this could not be true, materialistically you have quantity and quality, but spiritually you have allness. Spiritually, you have oneness. Spiritually, you have a God or consciousness that cannot be divided, cannot be separated from itself. And therefore, Scripture reveals, Son, all that I have is thine. Not a tiny measure of it. Again, if you look materialistically, you cannot understand this, because you can only understand division, separation. And you cannot understand that the infinite can at the same time be the individual. However, you can begin to glimpse this by remembering an exercise of our contemplative meditation. Suppose you close your eyes and you realize that you are now alone inside of yourself, inside of your own being. But in this silence, you now have access to infinity. In other words, I, infinity, stand at the door of your consciousness and knock. And now you must open the door and bid me enter. In other words, you must open the door of your consciousness and say, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth." And then you'll know that you are in direct communion with allness. You have access to allness. The mind of God is now your mind. The whole being of God is pouring itself into and through your individual consciousness. But since there are 75 of us sitting here doing the same thing, you can see that all 75 of us have access to the same infinity. The same infinity that Jesus had access to when he said, "I and my Father are one." And I speak of my Father and your Father. Therefore, you and your Father are one. And now, in this moment of contemplation, you having opened your consciousness and admitted God, do you not see that now you and your Father are one? And the allness, which is God consciousness, is now your individual consciousness, and all that the Father hath is yours. All that God is, I am. Now, thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I am one with all that God is and all that God has. And just remember, at this moment there are 75 of us sitting here in the same relationship to the allness of God. God is not dividing itself a little bit to me and a little bit to you, but having opened the door of our consciousness, we have access to allness. All right. God is spirit. Therefore, you must avoid the materialistic sense of the human being going to God and expecting God to give you some measure of matter. Now you understand the Master saying, take no thought for food or clothing or housing. Seek only spiritual grace. Seek only spiritual wisdom. Seek only the gift of God, and it must be spirit. For God is spirit, and those who worship God, those who pray to God, must pray in spirit. Now, God is spirit, and that spirit is pouring itself as my consciousness. It is now my consciousness. It is my being. And of course, even my body now has become the temple of God, for God is in his holy temple. Do you see that whatever is to take place now must be a spiritual something? Whatever is to flow into my consciousness and yours at this moment must be something of a spiritual nature. It can be beauty, art, literature, grace, love, truth, the peace that passeth understanding, my peace, God's peace, spiritual peace. Now, as this activity of God, activity of consciousness, flows as our activity, it takes form in the mind. And I may all of a sudden be gripped with some great idea of beauty that floods the mind, and then all of a sudden my hands begin to work with a pencil, with a pen, with a brush. And this spiritual beauty that has entered my soul and has now expressed itself in my mind comes forth through my hands in a tangible form. Could be music, painting, sculpture, architecture. Literature. But the Spirit of God, which is now the Spirit of me, enters the mind as a tangible form and comes forth as a concrete, what we would call thing. It is because of this that when an individual is inspired spiritually and it takes form in his mind, it could come forth as a bridge, a building, a new invention, a new discovery, because the beginning of it was the spirit or consciousness of God becoming the spirit and consciousness of my individual being. And this is infinity. And then this takes form in my mind, tangible form, and then my hands bring it through into expression. And so you have witnessed the activity of creation and birth. There's nothing material about it. It begins with the Spirit of God pouring into my consciousness or yours as love. That divine love pours from my consciousness into my mind. And tangibly it brings unto me my own, with whom I am one. And then this idea of love, union, oneness, comes forth as the creation of our next generation. There's nothing sinful, nothing evil, nothing finite, nothing mortal about it at all. It all has its beginning in our conscious union with God. Now, because this has not been the fact in human experience, creation has come through a material sense of creation. Not a material creation. You can't have that because God is the only creator and God is spirit. But you can entertain a material sense of creation, and that's where this whole feeling comes from of wrongness and sometimes wrong consequences. In the same way, all of what we call the immorality and even delinquency in this age has its basis in that same material sense, because instead of the youth understanding that their first duty every day of their lives is to establish this conscious oneness with the source, spirit, instead of being animated throughout the days and the nights by this spirit, they have not been taught this. Therefore, they seek to have a good time at this level, the materialistic level, the level of mind and body. And so they're led into all kinds of pleasures, pastimes, and that eventuate in what the world calls sin. None of which could happen if an individual realized on waking in the morning that God is spirit, and that spirit is the animating consciousness of my being. It is that Spirit of God that permeates my soul, mind, and body and supplies me with its creation. Then the whole mind and body would be devoted during the day to letting that spiritual unfoldment take place. Therefore, both mind and body would be led in different directions. Now, all of human experience has its foundation in material sense. A material sense of a spiritual universe. A material sense of spiritual creation. A material sense of spiritual supply. And therefore, all of the many prayers that are uttered to God for food and clothing and housing and supply, all the nonsense that goes up to God in prayer, when it is so simple to look out of any window anywhere on the face of the earth and see that there is no lack. The earth is full of God's glory, whether in crops, vegetables, fruits, fish, birds, whatnot. The earth is full of the glory of the Lord, full of the abundance of God, and therefore, if instead of thinking materialistically, oh, this has to be divided up, and the oil has Rockefeller's name on it, and the automobiles have General Motors and Ford's name on it, and instead of that, which is certainly a materialistic concept, instead of realizing, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine, and then instead of looking at the other fellow's possessions and desiring them, living in the consciousness that through my consciousness I have access to infinity. And this will pour into my consciousness spiritually, take form in my mind mentally, and then appear externally in what we call material form. So it is, then, that the human being is living in a purely material sense of world. Please understand, he is not living in a material world because there isn't any. God is spirit, and God made all that is made, and anything that God did not make was not made. Therefore, all that exists is spirit and spirit's creation, about which the human race entertains a materialistic concept. This is the experience of the prodigal that wandered away from the Father's house where everything was free, where everything was the gift of God, where everything was ours by divine right, out into a world of limitation where we believed we could create an empire of our own. For a time, empires flourish. National empires, family empires. But you notice that none of them has ever been permanent. If any of them had been permanent, well, by now, Caesar's family would have owned probably all of the world. Or Genghis Khan's family. Or any of the rulers who have acquired whole nations. They would have owned the world. Or some of our financial, industrial geniuses who have built commercial empires. Their families would eventually own whole nations. But you see, it doesn't last that way. It always breaks up. It is always dissolved because there is something inherent in the situation which does it. You remember that Emerson voiced it? The dice of God are always loaded. There is always something inherent, and that something is a spiritual sense, a spiritual wisdom that is in consciousness. And when the overbearing get too overbearing, the empire cracks beneath them. So we have a spiritual God, a spiritual man, but now entertaining a materialistic concept of this world. We start with creation and birth, so that you may see that man does not evolve from a seed. That man has his beginning, that is, individual being, has his beginning in God consciousness. God consciousness expressing itself as love, joy, beauty, truth, entering the mind as what we call love, drawing us to each other, and then in that union enabling the spiritual activity of God to form itself through the mind as love and probably through the body as a seed. But just remember that even if you acknowledge the seed, you must acknowledge that there was a time when there was no seed. Therefore, when there was only the consciousness of God. And through the medium of individual consciousness, through the mind and the body, we bring forth the next generation.
Thank you, Joel. I stop here because you can listen to the tape furthermore, because now it's getting to the part where we're going into the direction that moves beyond the material sense. Now, I thought this part we couldn't skip. Like, it's really good to take a good look at it. That's why I brought it up, and you know, I elaborated on it. So listen to the tape and see what happens. And if you have any questions, you can always say shoot them over to me. I'd love to take a look at it with you. That's one thing. And the other is this: is like the to really come to the bottom of this, it really depends on how you hear this. Now, this is why it's so good. Like, we start always with a meditation. We always start with quiet and already like releasing ideas, opening our consciousness to become receptive for what is actually being communicated here. And that's an essential step. So in your listening, you can use that too. Otherwise, it easily can become that you listen to it, to a tape, and you hear words and you hear ideas instead of getting the full experience for yourself that has nothing to do with the tape, but has to do with you opening up for your God communication. Because the answer is not in the tape. The answer is literally in your experience of yourself. So now, thank you so much for today. Thank you for participating in this and being really there, being present in this. So I totally appreciate that. And I hope to see you next week in the next episode of Consciousness Transformed. So we here will still listen to some music, and thank you for everything. Have a wonderful rest of your day.